Now, over the last week, the whole country has been up in arms over the fact that we have South Africans with arms who are in the Democratic Republic of Congo. A lot of us didn't even know that we were there, but apparently we've been there for a very, very long time. And now more than a dozen people that we know of, confirmed soldiers, South African men and servicewomen, have died. And so I am delighted to welcome two people to explain to us exactly what is going on, because frankly, I don't even know fully if our government knows exactly what is going on in the DRC. So thrilled to welcome Guy Martin and Ricardo Teixeira from Defense Web and Protection Web. You guys must have had more media calls in the last week than you've had in your whole lives. Am I right?
Yeah, it's getting a bit tiring.
Well, thank you for making time for us. Okay, so we're really going to make this the authoritative interview on everything that is going on. So let's start at the start. Why is there conflict happening in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, Guy?
Well, you could trace it back to the Berlin Conference of 1880, whatever it was. And from then on, it's just been shambolic. So when the European powers divided up that region, they didn't take into account the actual borders of who was living where, how many ethnic groups were there, where those tribes were based. And that's created a lot of the conflicts that we see today. So fast forward to the late 1990s and the First and Second Congo Wars. I think that's one of the real starting points for what we see playing out today in the DRC. So in the First and Second Congo Wars, Rwanda, backed by Uganda, they intervened in the DRC and they overthrew Laurent Kabila, and installed a pro-Rwandan government. Unfortunately, that didn't last very long, and that government turned its back on the Rwandans, resulted in the Second Congo War. 9 countries got involved, numerous militia groups got involved, at least 3 million died in that conflict. Part of the other element to this whole crisis is the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide. So a lot of perpetrators of the Rwandan genocide fled into the DRC. Rwanda went in to apparently chase them down, hold them to account. They supported certain militias and rebel groups. And those militias and rebel groups, not always aligned to the Rwandans. There's Ugandan influence and involvement. Burundi has quite strong interests in that region. So you've got this whole big melting pot of armed groups, non-state actors, and outside influence. Rwanda in particular has caused a lot of the tension and trouble, specifically as backing the M23. I mean, they are the rebel force that everyone's talking about at the moment. But there are about 120 different armed groups in the DRC. And the other armed groups, such as the FDLR, they're also quite a headache for the DRC government, for the MONUSCO peacekeepers there, for the SADC mission. But basically, for the last 25, 30 years, the situation in the DRC has just been deteriorating. It's gone through ups and downs. But I think we've come to a head now. This is the worst fighting and the greatest instability we have seen in the DRC since 2012, when the M23 captured Goma for the first time. So after they captured Goma then, the UN, they created a very robust mandate with their peacekeeping operation. For the first time, they tasked their peacekeepers with an offensive role. So they went out and actively targeted rebel groups like the M23. South Africa was part of that, along with Tanzania and Malawi. And with that extra military pressure, they were able to bring the M23 to the negotiating table and cease hostilities. But things were only dormant for a while. Tensions have been simmering for the last decade, and the M23 have been training, they've been getting much better equipment from Rwanda. They are a far better fighting force than they were in 2012. And
so then I just want to jump in with Ricardo. What is, like, I guess, Rwanda's goal or motive in causing so much instability in the Eastern DRC?
So ultimately, it's unclear. It's not like Kagame has put it out or he's tweeted it. Yeah, I think only he truly really knows. But there are a lot of resources available that are untapped within the region, and mineral resources, but not just that, water. If we look at where the battle is playing out, it's around Lake Kivu, which is one of the largest lakes in the Great Lake region. And if you look at the size of Rwanda and their international boundary on the lake, by controlling the north, and now that they've gone around to the west side of the lake, they can control a larger share of the body of water. And freshwater resources are becoming increasingly scarce, and the untapped mineral resources in the mountains are also incredibly valuable.
Particularly coltan, right? So
coltan
is
copper.
This mineral resource which is crucial as a capacitor because it's a high conductor of electricity, which means that you can put a very small amount of it into your cell phone, into your laptop, and it's absolutely vital for big producer nations to have coltan.
Yeah.
So there may be some kind of nefarious economic incentive also in that situation. So what just happened in the last 10 days or so? What happened?
So we got to go back a little bit further. M23 kind of came out of the woodwork again towards the end of 2022 and started going on the offensive. But kind of in the last few weeks, they started going a bit harder on the offensive. And before the battle even began, it was rather...
This was around a city called Goma, right?
Around Goma and Sake on the north shore of Lake Kivu. But they were quite tactful and strategic about it. Before they even started attacking Sake and Goma, they had surrounded most of the territory to the north and captured a lot of the high ground and strategic roads along the main arteries, the main highway or road in the region. So before the battle even kicked off, they had quite an advantageous position and were thinking quite strategically, and they had the high ground, as you can, well, as the famous saying goes. And they had definitely a lot more manpower in the region than SAMI DRC did.
So where is the Congolese army in all of this, Guy? Because it's their country, right? Like, you would think that they should be first and foremost on the front line of protecting their own borders.
Indeed. So just a little factoid I'd like to throw out there. Some FRDC, that's DRC government soldiers, they get paid about $100 a month.
Okay.
And sometimes those salaries are withheld. In comparison, some Romanian mercenaries who were assisting the DRC government, they were getting $3,000 to $5,000 a month. Wow. So that just shows you how badly paid government forces are. They're also not very well trained, morale is poor, they're not very well equipped. Some of their tanks only have a few rounds available. So the FRDC, they crumbled very quickly. They are not well motivated, they're not a great fighting force. They do work reasonably well in conjunction with others, but what kind of precipitated the fall of Goma is when the government forces started melting away, surrendering. And that left a lot of the other soldiers, the UN soldiers, the SADC soldiers, exposed. And there's no way that they could face the onslaught of these rebels by themselves.
So what's the South African presence in Goma? Do we know, as part of this peacekeeping force that's actually got an offensive mandate to fight against the DRC government's enemies?
So we have two contingents in the region. So under MONUSCO, we have an element under the Force Intervention Brigade, which has that offensive UN mandate. And that's roughly about a reinforced battalion, so about 1,450 troops.
Okay.
And then we also have a contingent under SAMI DRC, which is the largest part of the SAMI DRC contingent, which was mandated for 2,900 troops. Although we've discovered recently, the government's been very quiet about it, but they didn't have that full number of troops there. We believe that the count is somewhere between 1,300 and 1,800.
Total, or just in that section?
Just under that section.
Okay, so it's about, what, 3,000 South Africans?
We can safely say about 3,000 South Africans are there, yeah.
Okay, and how did they get caught in the crossfire to the point where at least a dozen are now dead?
Well, what's important to note there is under SAMI DRC, it's not a peacekeeping force. It is a peace enforcement mission with an offensive mandate.
Right.
And based on the status of forces agreement, we are actually fighting in essence as an extension of the or of the DRC military. So when the battle kicked off, as being a party to the conflict, they responded with fire. So I know Angie, the Minister of Defense, said that they were firing over our base at the DRC troops.
Not the case.
No, the case is that they were firing at us and we were firing back.
Okay. And there's been a lot of fighting, a lot of back and forth, political fighting, the likes of Julius Malema saying that our SAND Air Forces are under-resourced, poorly trained, poorly equipped, and by no fault of their own, they've been failed by the ministry, or at least the Department of Defense, and the higher-ups in the South African National Defense Force. What do you say to that, Guy?
Absolutely spot on. And this is not something that's a new revelation. We've been warning about this for years. It goes back right to the Battle of Bangui in March 2013, when 15 of our soldiers were killed fighting Seleka rebels. Everyone thought that after that, the government would sit up, take notice, and say, gosh, that's a lot of dead soldiers. We need to properly resource and capacitate the military. We are going to increase spending. We're going to implement the defense reviews that we've had. None of that's happened. We've gone backwards. Our defense spending has been in decline. In real terms, the defense budget is shrinking, and the SANDF is just becoming too thinly stretched. So I would say that years ago, the warning bells were there. We should not have deployed, firstly to Mozambique as well as this SADC mission in the DRC.
And so what's the state of play now in Goma? Do we have 3,000 trapped troops who can't get out and who are about to be overwhelmed by M23?
Well, the government doesn't like to say that they're surrendered and that they've been captured. They say that the soldiers are safely in their bases, surrounded by M23 and disarmed without ammunition, but they haven't surrendered.
Are they disarmed without ammunition?
Well, they have their weapons, but they did run out of ammunition, and it seems that they have been confined to their bases.
Okay, so they're being held in prison within their own quarters.
Not in prison, but yes, confined.
Imprisoned confined within their own quarters by M23,
so
who now control the city.
We can look at the definition of what surrendered and being a prisoner of war is, but
Sure.
our troops are confined to their base in Goma.
Against their will.
Against their will.
Okay.
There have been reports that they separated the officers from the enlisted troops, although that's not been confirmed to us yet. And there hasn't been a lot of clear communication with the troops on the ground. I know on Friday, Sandu, the Defence Force Union, informed us that they had gone about 48 hours where they were unable to contact any of the members on the ground, that internet's been jammed and it's been spotty, but their movements are also controlled. They're not allowed to leave the base, and they are, in essence, prisoners of war.
So what happens now? Ramaphosa has been fighting with Kagame, which feels extraordinary because Rwanda shouldn't be in the DRC, and there's been this war of words. We've got these troops stranded. What happens now?
You want to take this one?
I think that's the million-dollar question. So there are a few ways in which this could play out. There have been reports that South Africa has been sending reinforcements to the area, but that won't actually do much good. Goma is under M23 control. There's no way we can fight our way out of that situation. We can't land at the airport. That's controlled. Rwanda has surface-to-air missiles, so flying anything in that area would be super risky. The way I see it, the only way out is a diplomatic solution. We need to engage with Rwanda and get them to somehow exit our troops out. So we've seen hundreds of Romanian mercenaries being taken out through Rwanda and flown back home. We've seen some UN forces have been pulling out of Goma. Some of them have been allowed to leave. Now, if we do get our troops out via Rwanda, that could imply that we'll have to leave all our equipment behind. So whatever the situation, it's a major egg on face. I don't see any way to leave the situation with our heads held high.
And what is supposed to be the political consequences of this kind of thing happening? Because Angie Motshekga is the Minister of Defense, but has only been for a very short period of time. This pre-exists her. In certain countries in the world, this would have consequences for presidencies. But what is supposed to happen now, politically, to make sure this doesn't happen again?
In an ideal world, not only the minister would be held to account, but also the chiefs of the branches of the armed services, because while everything was raging, they thought it was a good idea to
have a golf day.
Have a golf day.
Yeah.
Not just that, but to commandeer a helicopter to fly them to the golf course. So ideally, what should happen is that they should be held accountable, and the Minister of Defense should be held accountable. I mean, a week before the battle, Angie was on TV saying that there's no problem with our defense forces, and they can match any threat that comes our way. So ideally, we should be seeing the leadership held accountable, and a new defense review should be commissioned. One was published in 2015 after the fallout from the Battle of Bangui, but there was never any funding and associated long-term planning put in place to support the review and to implement it. So some of those lessons need to be learned and some steps to be taken, and we need to firstly get the troops home, hold the leadership accountable, and then take a good hard look at our defense force and decide what we want and what we need.
Yeah. Well, thank you. As much as that is an incredibly depressing tale, I now understand it. Really, really appreciate both your time. That's Guy Martin and Ricardo Teixeira from Protection Web and Defense Web.